Okay, so here we go. 7.1a, new module, solving by factoring. There's a few things up here you can read if you want to. Just reminders, factor out the greatest common factor first if you can. The main difference between this section and the previous chapters, we're going to now see equal signs. So what we need to do is we need to get our equations into standard form before we factor them, and then we're going to add one more step onto the end. Some things that are important to point out, as I grab a marker here, is we're going to be using this term roots or zeros. Sometimes they will also be called solutions. And those are all of our answers. When we get graphing, they will be called x-intercepts, and we'll talk more about that later. So, let's see. All right, so here's my first equation. See the equal sign right there in the middle? I need to get this to equal 0, which means I need everything on the same side. Now, there's a little trick when I'm getting everything on the same side. First off, I need my leading coefficient to be positive. That needs to determine what side I go to. This is the highest exponent right here. This term has the highest exponent. It's already positive, so I don't want to move it to the left because that would make it negative. So instead, I'm going to move the 19x over to here. Now, that gives me 0, and then I have 6x squared. And if I want to keep this in standard form, I need to write the minus 19x before the minus 7 so that I keep it in standard form. All right, next step is to factor that. I don't see that they have anything in common, so I'm going to go ahead and look at my snowflake. So if I do 6 times negative 7, that's negative 42, and negative 19 on the bottom. I believe it's 21 and 2, isn't it? 21 times 2 is 42. 21 and 2, let's see, the 21 has to be negative. Up here, I would put 6x squared, 6x and 6x. 6x over negative 21 does reduce. What does it reduce to? I can divide by 3. That would be 2x over negative 7. And this one, if I divide by 2, reduces to 3x over 1. So let's see. I have my 0 equals. He stays along for the ride. I have 2x minus 7 and 3x plus 1. Now that part, other than the equals 0 part, that should be a review from last chapter. What changes here is what I'm going to do with these parentheses now. I'm going to take each of these parentheses and I need to individually set them equal to 0. And as I solve them, 0 plus 7 is 7. I'm going to get an answer. X equals 7 over 2. What that means is if I said, oh, solve this but make x equal to 7 over 2, this parentheses would end up turning into 0. And 0 times anything gives me 0. That's what's known as the zero product property. I'm trying to figure out what's going to make them equal to 0 so that I can make this statement true. Next thing I'll do is I'll set this guy equal to 0. Subtracting 1, 3x equals negative 1. Divide by 3, and x equals negative 1/3. So, going back to the beginning, what was the degree of my original equation? The highest exponent was a 2, so the degree was 2. How many zeros or roots or solutions did I find? 2. Those two things should always be the same. Your degree should be always the same as your number of zeros. That's actually called the fundamental theorem of algebra, and the corollary is that the degree and the number of zeros has to be the same. Okay? Now, some of the roots, we may get double roots or roots with a multiplicity, and we'll talk about that tomorrow in the next lesson, the 7.1b. But that's basically what I want you to get out of this, is that the degree should be equal to the number of zeros. Okay? All right, next one. Looking at this, let's see. What do they all have in common that I can take out? I think they all have an x. If I take out an x, that leaves me with 3x cubed minus 2x squared minus 15x plus 10. Okay, I took out an x. Now I'm going to look at this. What kind of factoring do I need to use here? I have 4 terms, so I can't use snowflake. I have to use grouping. So I'm going to cut it in half. Those two have, let's see, x squared in common. And left inside would be 3x minus 2. Right here, I'm going to bring down that minus sign. Those two have a 5 in common. And inside would be 3x, another minus in order to get that plus. So let's see, I have x squared minus 5, and I have 3x minus 2. Bring down that x I took out at the beginning and the equals 0 that just goes along for the right. So I've factored it, and now I need to come up with my zeros, or my roots. Now let me step back for a minute. What was my degree? My degree was a degree 4. That was the highest exponent, which means that I need to come up with 4 zeros. All right? I'm going to get 1 from here, 2 from there, and another 1 from there. So the first thing I do is I set this guy equal to 0. That's one of my 4 answers. All right? Next, I'm going to set this guy equal to 0. X squared minus 5 equals 0. I'm going to add 5. So I get x squared equals 0 plus 5 is 5. Now to get the x squared gone and get it down to x, I have to square root. And anytime I take the square root, I have to remember plus and minus. Because, like, for example, the square root of 9 is both 3 and negative 3. I have to remember both of those. So I'm going to write this one as x equals positive and negative radical 5. There's 2 more answers. So I have 1, 2, 3 answers. And my final answer, my 4th answer, is going to come from here. 3x minus 2 equals 0. Add 2. 3x equals 2. Divide by 3. And I get x equals 2/3. Totally fine to get a fraction. Just make sure it's reduced. Totally fine to get a radical. If you can simplify a radical, do it. For example, if you get radical 8 as an answer, you would probably get plus or minus radical 8. Go ahead and do what you did probably last year in IM2 and simplify that radical. I see 2 2's, so I can take a 2 out. I have 1 2 left inside. So if you can simplify something like that, go ahead and get to that point right there and make it as simple as possible. Okay? All right, so the factoring part is what you did last chapter. So there could be grouping, there could be difference of squares, there could be some indifference of cubes, but those ones I wouldn't ask you to solve. I would just ask you to factor. There could be snowflake, there could be GCF where you're taking something out in common. Once you do that, just set all of those parts equal to 0. Okay? Sometimes you may not be able to take out an x. Let's say you took out a 2 instead and you had something like, let's see, where can I write it? I'm going to write it in a different color so it stands out. Let's say I had something like 2 times x plus 3. Well, I know I can get an answer from there. Out here, does it make sense to set 2 equal to 0? That's not a true statement. And there's no x for me to solve. So when I have just a number out there, there's nothing to do with it. It doesn't have an answer with it. It only has an answer if it has an x. Okay? So hopefully I've covered everything that's on your homework. Your homework for this assignment or for this section is your 7.1a worksheet. Happy studying!